So for our next speaker, it's another pleasure to introduce Dr. Helen Roberts, who joins us from the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, otherwise known as DEFRA in the UK, who's going to talk to us today about surveillance of emerging diseases. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucy. Right. I think I sent a PDF of, we're looking at, so I'm just going to go back up to the start. So thank you very much indeed for inviting me to this meeting today. I'm here sort of covering two aspects really. First of all, my business as usual work in terms of disease monitoring, risk assessment, and then tomorrow a little bit more about being part of the research funders for UKRI. So first of all, I should explain, I'm in the exotic disease control team in DEFRA, and I have the remit for non-livestock diseases, so companion animals, equines, wildlife, pets of all sorts, and the research money, as I said, but for our exotic diseases of any animals, and the science and risk assessment advice to the Chief Veterinary Officer. And what I'm going to talk to you about here today is One Health and the work that we do across government from a One Health perspective. And in particular, I'm going to focus on a group called HARES. So first of all, I'm going to explain a little bit about how we look for disease and how we monitor things across government. And this is jointly with the UK Health Security Agency, who are doing it for public health, and ourselves in the Animal Plant Health Agency doing it for the animal health side, and then how we join that information up. So as you can see here from a public health perspective, the team in the epidemic and zoonosis team, they are looking constantly at various different websites, monitoring things. So we are really interested in AI and how that could help us going forward. But constantly monitoring all these websites, verifying it, it's really important that you do some verification of those different reports as they're made, because we're looking often at notifiable diseases that can have a really big impact on the work that we're doing in government. The risk assessment side, which we'll talk about through the HARES meeting, and then reporting out to the rest of the UKHSA and also our Department for Health and Social Care colleagues. And that can all lead into generating information about doing an action or response. This is mainly interested in international events that could have an impact on the UK, either through the import of those people with those infections, or on British interests overseas. We've obviously got a lot of links into our Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. And then you can put exactly the same sort of process on it for the animal health threats, using a similar way of detection by scanning all of the different websites that you can get. It's a bit simpler with animal health because we have something called WOA and WAHIS, so the World Organization for Animal Health, where all countries, I think there's now something like 200 countries that are members of WOA, they have to report the listed diseases, and particularly if they are new emerging diseases, within a certain number of hours to that system, and then it generates an email and a notification out to the other countries. So it is simpler than from the public health perspective. But again, we're verifying those reports, we're risk assessing them, and reporting out across government and deciding on an action or response. And you can see here, it's a busy slide. I don't expect you to read all of it, but you can see here those different sources of intelligence, then how we do that rapid risk assessment. And there are lots of different things here that we have in common from, this is the public health side, but also from the animal health side, and particularly through the HARES group, which you can see here. I will mention the international natural hazard forward look as well, because that's a really interesting process that we've got now. We've been doing it since around 10 years, since 2014, when Ebola in West Africa first happened, because there were a lot of people across government who said, oh, why wasn't I aware? So, well, for a good start, wake up, read the news, but also, Minister, we have been telling you about it, but you've not necessarily read your emails. So let's find a better way to tell you about it. And what we frequently find is that ministers, rather than reading something, they like to see a picture. So we came up with a process. This is it. It's a weekly report that they can have access to, which tells them about what's going on around the world that could potentially impact on the UK for all those different natural hazards. And because we're also dealing with the weather, so we have the Met Office, which will input things like there's a large hurricane expected in this area, there's a drought in this area, there's heavy rainfall over here, etc. But we also have the British Geological Survey, who are looking at the risk level for the different volcanoes that happen around the world. I would say it's very difficult to put in here things like earthquakes, because they cannot be predicted, but volcanic action can. So it just focuses on the volcanoes. And we give a RAG rating to each of those events as they occur, and that's done every single week. So things can go up and can go down and can get worse, hopefully get better, but we can also use that to inform different government departments. And we are now putting in place, happily, a more public platform that will be hosted at British Geological Survey that will allow other people to have a look at it as well. But bearing in mind that we make no assessment of the capabilities of those countries, and it's not about the risk to those countries, it's what we see as being something that British government needs to be concentrating on. So I'll move now to the HARES group. HARES is a cross-government One Health group that was set up after the BSE crisis in the UK. And some of you here are probably too young to even remember it. But essentially, back in 1998, one of the biggest mistakes that was made was that the chief vet at that time came out saying, no risk to public health. Now, for a good start, we didn't know that at that point. And also, the vets should never be making a comment about the risk to public health, and the medics should never be making a comment about the risks to animal health. It should be done by the person with the best knowledge, the best expertise, etc. And from the very, very large public inquiry that came out of BSE was the comment that there was no risk assessment group that would look at the animal to human health risk. So HARES was set up, and in fact, this year is our 20th anniversary, and I have the exceedingly lucky job of being the current chair of HARES since 2018, following on from Dilys Morgan, who's from the public health sector. So, of course, as we see that statistic thrown around all the time, 70% of emerging infections of humans originate in animals. And therefore, keeping an eye on what those different animal threats are and understanding their potential for zoonotic transmission is very important for this as a pre-pandemic and pandemic preparedness. I don't like talking about pandemic preparedness. I'd rather just talk about epidemic preparedness, because not everything has to be a pandemic for you to have to want to work on it. And it's, you could even stop a pandemic by stopping everybody traveling anywhere. It doesn't always have to be that you're prepared for every single event, but it's knowing what you can and can't do about it. And we could talk a lot about COVID, but I wish they had come to speak to the animal health sector earlier on, particularly in terms of control of these diseases. Anyway, my rant is over. HARES. So we are made up of veterinarians, scientists and medics from all the devolved administrations, from public health sector, animal health and food safety. And we also have, as part of that group, the same members from the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man. So these are our Crown dependencies, and also from the Republic of Ireland as well. We meet every month without fail, and we have done that through every crisis that has happened. We've still managed to meet. And we look through those horizon scanning reports and discuss whether we need to go and do any further work in terms of the risk assessment. And it's a really good network of people. We've known each other for years. It's a very open forum. No professional hierarchy is allowed. So no vet could turn up and say, well, I'm a vet and I know better. And no medic can turn up and say, I'm a medic and I know better. And from a personal perspective, I'm a scientist, so I'm neither of those. So I have absolute right to tell them to get back in their box if necessary. We do the hazard identification stage. Every month, we're looking at what's been brought up by the EPI-Intel team or by the International Disease Monitoring team. And we can be commissioned to do extra work. Sometimes that's done by the animal health, what's called the veterinary risk group, which is an animal plant health agency group. Again, they meet every month and they look at things that could be occurring in our surveillance areas. We're looking at acute clusters of cases, outbreaks, trends in new things happening or syndromes, new infections, undiagnosed syndromes, all sorts of things that can come up. And we'll talk about them in the group and say, do we need to worry about this? Do we need to do a risk assessment on it? Have we got enough information to deal with? And we're only interested in those topics that are not dealt with by another advisory group in government. So generally speaking, we're not that interested in foodborne zoonoses. We're not going to do salmonella. There's a whole other system in place for that. We're not going to deal with acute respiratory infections. There's a whole other group for that. But we're dealing with the weird. So it's often to do with pets, because so many of these other groups are looking at livestock. But we like to look at the pets, exotic animals, wildlife, anything like that, and a lot of vector-borne diseases as well. Then we have a system for doing the actual risk assessment, which is a tried and tested algorithm system. So a series of decision trees that have been developed, and they work, and they're simple, and anybody can go and do it if you've got access to the data and the evidence. We promote this to lots of international groups as well, and this has always been used by other countries. So Canada most recently, and Australia, but also Thailand, we were doing it quite recently, and Ghana and other places in Africa as well. Now, we're looking at the risk to the UK population, but other people will be obviously looking at their own particular risk. And we have not only an algorithm that covers a known pathogen, but also an unknown etiology. And that links back into what Alan was talking about with the canine coronaviruses as well. And when we don't have enough evidence to do the full template, we can just do a risk statement. And we're doing one of those at the moment on the highly pathogenic avian influenza H5N1 in cattle in the USA. Don't have enough information to fully understand it, but we need to get something out there to understand if there's a risk for the UK. And this is all available online, so you can go and Google, don't try and negotiate your way through the websites, but Google HARES and Public Health England or UK HSA, and it will take you to the risk assessment process. These are the algorithms that we're looking at, and as you go through, you're answering these different questions, and if you stop at any stage, then it becomes a particular risk level. And that can help you actually to think about your gaps, your evidence gaps, and therefore the research bit that we'll be talking more about tomorrow, identifying where new research has to be done. So these are the two different zoonotic risk algorithms when you've got a known pathogen and an unknown pathogen. And at the end of it, you get these risk levels, and those risk levels are translated into what sort of action you need to go and do. And it could be communication about something if it's at a low level, but it could also lead to proper full-on government, go out there, do some surveillance, put something in action right now because we've got a serious problem turning up. So just to give you an example of where we've done it recently, this request came from SAGE, our Science Advisory Group for Emergencies, and the Chief Medic, Chris Whitty. Next slide, please. And this is a qualitative assessment of the risk for SARS-CoV-2 for our UK Mustelidae populations. This followed on from the mink farming cases that happened across Europe. We don't have mink farming anymore in the UK. It was banned back in 2002. But we still have lots of people who keep ferrets as pets and as working animals as well. So we were going away to have a look at that. Because it was an emergency, we put together a very quick working group. We did it over a weekend, just had 5 of us working on it and giving up their weekends to go away, come up with all of the evidence that we had, think about animal imports, pet ferret keeping, the level of interaction that people have with their pet ferrets. And I could talk for quite a long time about the level of interaction people have with their pets. It's not healthy. And the mink farming, and how you could have somebody who works on a mink farm in another country who could potentially be reinfected by one of these new variants and then could travel to the UK. So it also became part of our travel process during that COVID time. And we found a gap in the methodology where we couldn't account for a mutation happening in the animal when you've got a background risk of high human infection happening anyway. So we changed the algorithm a bit to allow us to do that. So to ask the question, could it mutate? Could it become worse? Could it evade the immune response, whether that's a natural immune response or a vaccine-induced immune response? And you can see here that we did go through the probability of infection in the UK population. Yes, it could absolutely happen. If it gets into the animals in the first place, it could get back into the humans again. And then what's the impact on human health? Well, it was still low, because actually it's not going to be a significant number of people infected, because not that many people keep ferrets in comparison to dogs and cats, etc. Still, it's about 1 million people in the UK, but it's 12 million who keep cats, 12 million who keep dogs. So changing that algorithm now means that we can cope with some of these new mutations that might happen, which will be a really important part going forward for a lot of these diseases that we deal with. And then unknown etiology, and this is where I wanted to mention back to Alan's work on the canine coronavirus, is that we had this really huge die-off of crustacea along the northeast coast with an unknown etiology. And it was huge numbers washing up on the beach of crabs in particular, but also lobsters and big prawns and all the rest of it. And particularly the crabs lying on their backs, twitching with some sort of nervous syndrome going on. And we had no idea if there was going to be something similar happening in humans. There had been no pathogen identified at that stage, no toxin identified. And so we went to Alan's system to have a look at what they were finding, if there'd been a lot of diarrhea and vomiting. And we also went to the GP's practices in the area to see if any humans had shown an increase in skin disease, DMV, or neurological issues. Thankfully, found nothing. And actually seeing Alan's work and seeing that although they'd found what looked like a new virus, it was all over the country. So there was no link to people specifically walking on those beaches, and probably no link to human health, because it's very unlikely someone's going to walk along a beach and go, "Ooh, a crab, it's dying, it's twitching, it looks really sick, I'll take that home and eat it." So thankfully, there's some common sense still on there. So we publish all of our risk assessments. They're all available once they're done. As I say, sometimes it's a risk statement, not an assessment. And we update them when we think something new has happened and we need to do something else about it. And within those risk assessments, we always give recommendations for future work. And it can be just a comms thing that we need to do. It could be guidance for people. It could be, we need to make this a notifiable disease. We did that with Brucella canis quite recently, that until that point, it wasn't required for people to tell us if they were testing dogs positive for it. It could be that we want to go out there and do some targeted surveillance. So all these different options that we have that we can do it. And it's a trusted mechanism. In fact, Chris Whitty, as Chief Medical Officer, he used to be a member of HARES many years ago. So he definitely trusts the system and the people who are on it, and that it will be something appropriate that we come up with at the end. So I will finish there, and hopefully that's plenty of time. Thank you. It's not my cat, by the way. Not my cat.
thank you very much indeed. You beat me. You beat me to it, coming and giving you a 5-minute warning. You stayed under time, which is excellent. Thank you. Do we have any questions?
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for the nice presentation. Indeed, very informative and very interesting. I mean, the work you do. So you mentioned lastly that brucellosis in small animals is notifiable now in UK. Any other disease that is notifiable, or any disease that you would like or you wish to be put in a notifiable list in the future?
So that's a really good question, because we go through a process of deciding whether something should be made notifiable or reportable. And it's to do with whether there's a good diagnostic test for it, whether we think there's a genuine risk and impact associated with it, both by making it reportable, but also by not making it reportable, and whether there's a legislative change we need to make to do it. So most recently, we've made HVAI H5N1 reportable in mammals, and that would include cattle, serendipitously. We often look at things like leishmaniasis and have decided no, not necessary at the moment. It is reportable in humans, but not in the animals, because we don't have the vector. Now, if we were to have the vector, the sandfly, in the UK, I think we would change our minds very much so. So we keep an eye on it. We have done risk assessments on it in the hares group. And at the moment, it's not recommended to make it notifiable or reportable for animals. That one is, that is actually notifiable in rabbits, obviously, in hares, lagomorphs, yeah.
Hello, Callum Semple, Liverpool, ex-Sage, ex-Nerve Tag. So this is a loaded question. I think one of the strengths of Nerve Tag and Sage was that it invited difficult people onto it, such as Julian Hiscox and Callum Semple, to provide independent academic challenge and input. Does hares do the same? Because you put up a lot of government agencies, but I didn't see no. University of Lancaster or London School or Liverpool.
No, and so this, there's no point in my hedging around this one at all. The reason is that people from academia often come with their own agendas, and that makes it difficult for government to deal with it in that independent advice status. So what we would do is bring in experts from anywhere that we thought of to help write the risk assessments, but we wouldn't have them in the actual meetings. Some of the work that we discuss is quite sensitive and can be commercially sensitive as well, so it has to stay as a government discussion group. And then the challenge comes, hopefully, once we've published something, because we're there, it's a risk assessment. They are living documents and can always be updated. But as I say, it's the difficulty. We often do get asked, oh, I think I should be a member of hares. And Dilys said to me, when you take over as chair, if anybody comes and asks you, it means that they probably don't need to be on it. And it should be an agreement from all the members that we've got a gap in our expert knowledge about something. So we try and make sure we've got somebody from the environmental health side, the animal health, the food safety, and the public health sector. And we have members of Nerve Tag on it, and members from other advisory groups, but not from external government. It's a good challenge, though.
Yeah, Helen, lovely, candid talk. Thank you for coming. So I loved your bit where you said only the chief vet should comment on vet stuff, yeah, and the chief medical officer should comment on human health. And you're quite right about academics, right? One of the other things that we belong to in the UK, or we get emails from, in the Science Media Centre, can you comment on this, right? And you'll get a lot of people commenting on stuff of which they have no expertise. How does that impact you in Hares when you are doing your absolutely researched risk assessments and you get someone like me come on the telly and go, not that I have, no, there's no impact on humans to this mystery disease in China, it'll be completely fine, right? And I never said that, by the way, but imagine that I did. And how then does that impact you and ministers? You go, well, in the Independent or the Guardian or the Daily Mail, they seem to be our favourite ones today. So-and-so and so-and-so said this.
Yeah, I think it is always quite a challenge to deal with the media. I mean, I was really interested in what you were saying earlier about the stuff that was going on with feline infectious peritonitis. And we were having to deal with those media stories, 300,000 cats are going to die. And we were going back and saying, well, actually, the data at the moment doesn't say that. It's a proportion that they're using. It's a percentage if that happened across all of the stray cats in Cyprus. So there's definitely a challenge there. We work very closely with our comms team. And sometimes, again, being quite candid here, because we have to put out quite benign statements, communication statements that are saying, we know, we're aware, we're looking at the situation, then it can mean that people are saying, well, they're not looking closely enough and they don't really understand it. And you have to have a thick skin sometimes and just let it wash off you. Go back to the evidence, go back to the data and keep with that. But the media is definitely one of our most difficult groups to deal with, I'd say, and we've got very good comms people, but it will always be a challenge, I think.
One final question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. Just a quick question. Did you consider risk assessing FCOV23 at some point? Or it's out of context for your...
So it was actually assessed through our veterinary risk group, which includes on that Elizabeth McClung, who's the head of the small animal expert group. You had a bit of her slide up there. So that we did it through that group because it wasn't known to be zoonotic. So we would only be assessing it if there was any change that it became zoonotic. Then it could go through the Hares process as well. But for the time being, it went through the vet risk group. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay.